Hello, and welcome to the Uplifted Hand. Today we are in the car. We're going to go over chapters 3 and 4 today. So let's get into it. Starting with chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Last time we saw Esther as the new queen of Persia. She had no idea why she had been placed in the palace. And Mordecai had saved the king's life, but his act of loyalty seemed to be forgotten, and everything appeared calm. And then chapter 3 begins, and we're going to imagine standing in the king's gate. Officials, soldiers, nobles, merchants, everyone lowers themselves to the ground. Everyone except one man. Mordecai remained standing. Now, the Bible never clearly tells us why Mordecai refused to bow. It simply tells us that he did. And sometimes it's important to let the scriptures speak where it speaks and stay silent where it stays silent. But we have to notice something about Haman. So thousands of people were bowing and honoring Haman, but he can't stop looking at the one man who isn't. And that's where this week's Come Follow Me invitation begins. It asks us to notice Haman's feelings, words, and actions, because pride rarely starts with a dramatic fall. And it usually begins with a wounded ego. So now we're going to go into verses 5 through 11. Haman isn't satisfied with just punishing Mordecai. When he learns that Mordecai is Jewish, his anger grows into something a lot darker. He decides that one man's death is not enough. He wants every Jewish man, woman, and child throughout all of the 127 provinces to be destroyed. Now, imagine and think about how quickly this escalates. One refusal to bow becomes hatred towards an entire nation. Haman approaches King,
Xerxes.
but notices how he presents his case. He never says, I have a personal problem with Mordecai. Instead, he describes the Jewish people as a threat to the empire, and he twists the truth to make his personal hatred sound like good politics. The king does not investigate, he just trusts Haman. And he simply hands Haman his royal signet ring, which is giving him authority to issue this new decree that Haman is going over. And this is exactly why the Come Follow Me asks us to watch Haman's heart, because pride becomes anger, and anger becomes hatred, and hatred turns into destruction. Now let's go into the kingdom in confusion in verses 12 through 15. The decree that Haman made is translated into every language throughout the whole empire, 127 provinces. Royal couriers ride in every direction carrying the news that on a specific day, every Jewish family may be killed and their possessions will be taken. Now imagine hearing that announcement in our own town. Now, also imagine that your children are included in this. The Bible ends chapter 3 with one of the most heartbreaking contrasts in this whole story. It says the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. So while families are grieving, the two men responsible are sharing a drink together, and the city understands something is terribly wrong, but the palace doesn't seem to feel the weight, which has just been set in motion. So now we're going to go into Esther 4, verses 1 through 8, and we see Mordecai mourns. When Mordecai learns about this decree, he tears his clothes, he puts on sackcloth and ashes, and he cries throughout the city. Soon the Jewish communities throughout the empire are doing the same thing. They fast, they weep, they mourn. Now, there is something beautiful here, though. Before anyone talks about strategy or making a plan, God's people turn to God. And meanwhile, Esther is inside of the palace, and she hears that Mordecai is mourning, but she doesn't know why. All of this is happening, and she does not know why. So she sends him new clothes, hoping to help him out, but Mordecai is refusing them and saying, fresh clothes can't fix this problem. And instead, he sends Esther a copy of this decree, why he's mourning, why they are all mourning. And for the first time, Esther understands exactly what is happening. So now in Esther 4, verses 9 through 14, we see Esther's first response is understandable. She reminds Mordecai that anyone who approaches the king without being invited can be put to death. She hasn't been called into the king's presence for 30 days. So she's not making excuses. She's just describing a very real danger. So Mordecai sends back one of the most powerful messages in this whole chapter or chapters. And he says, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And I love that he says, who knows? Because he doesn't claim to understand everything God is doing. He wonders if all of these seemingly ordinary events are Vashti's removal, Esther becoming queen, Mordecai saving the king, have actually been preparing for this very moment. Now we're going to dive into verses 15 through 17. Esther's answers change the story. She tells Mordecai, gather all the Jews in Susa and fast for me for 3 days. She doesn't immediately run to the king. She first asks God's people to seek the Lord together. So the come follow me reminds us that fasting is an expression of trust. Esther isn't relying on her beauty. She's not relying on her position as queen. She's replacing her trust in God. And then she says, I will go to the king. And if I perish, I perish. That's not hopelessness. It's courage. Yeah, courage isn't believing nothing bad can happen. It's choosing to do what is right, even when you know the risks. So now we're going to look into the come follow me. It asks us to notice Haman's feeling, words, and actions. And what do they reveal about his heart? It asks us to notice whether Esther fasted before she acted. And what does that teach us about trusting the Lord? And it asks us what gave Esther the courage to do the right thing. So as we continue reading this week, we shouldn't just look for the big miracles, but we should look for the quiet preparations and the small details. And when pride destroys and when faith strengthens, and when ordinary people discover they've been prepared for such a time as this. Thank you for listening to today's Come Follow Me. Tomorrow we're going to go over 5 and 6.